Bret Easton Ellis's first novel, Less Than Zero, was one of the books that defined a generation, chronicling the decadence and the aimlessness of the early 1980s. He was 21 when it was published and hadn't yet graduated from college. His third novel, American Psycho, made waves of a very different sort when it was dropped by its original publisher for excessive violence and roundly attacked by feminists. In his latest book, The Informers, he re-explores the emptiness of the 1980s and the sex, drugs, and violence of Los Angeles. We're pleased to have him here to talk about some of these ideas as well as the book, The Informers. Welcome. Good to have you here.
Nice to be here.
Boy, I got a lot for you, I'm telling you.
All right. I'm going to be prepared. I'm ready. I think I'm ready.
Let's first of all talk about what happened to you. I mean, in Bennington College, and then the success of the books and the early success and what that does to you. But let me fast forward to American Psycho. Okay. What happened after American Psycho? Because there were threats against your life. I mean, people were up in arms, and you had the Simon & Schuster business about, you walked away with $300,000, it is said, and the book went to another publisher, Knopf and Tony Mehta, and it was to be sold for a movie, and I don't know where that is, and we'll find out. But what happened to you?
What happened to me was I felt I was in a movie that I had no control over. I didn't understand the script. I had no idea what was happening. The events surrounding the publication of that book were so surreal. They were hard to take literally. Your publisher decides to cancel a book. Well, that's strange enough. That doesn't happen every day. Then the National Organization of Women decides to protest the publication of the book. Well, okay. By the time the death threats come, I mean, you're in a surreal world that you never thought you'd be in. What happened eventually was I thought it really wasn't going to distract me from my work. I really thought it wasn't going to bother me that much. I was in the middle of another novel when the controversy, burst forth. And ultimately it did. It did distract from my writing a lot. And I found myself not writing for a long time and basically hiding out in Richmond, Virginia. I had to get out of New York. I stayed in L.A. a little bit, moved to Richmond, try to write. And that helped a little bit.
Yeah. Now, did you have nervous breakdowns?
Well, I don't know. I mean, not real nervous breakdowns.
The reason I ask you is I've read that, but I don't know, and therefore I say, let's find out from the source.
I had a couple nervous breakdowns. They were way before the American Psycho stuff happened. I mean, it was just, post-college jitters, I guess you'd call them. I mean, got out of college that summer. What was I going to do? I sort of freaked out a little bit, and I had some problems there. But other than that, no, I did not have a nervous breakdown at all during the post-American Psycho.
Yeah. So, in other words, the breakdown business came earlier, but and whatever happened. But what did it do to you? I mean, you felt like you were living in a novel or somebody else's movie that was on fast forward or something?
What it did was it made me a lot more cynical about the publishing business, and it also made me I think, unfortunately, a lot less sympathetic to feminists and their viewpoints about, their agenda. And that was disheartening, because I always felt that I, was pretty much on their side. I mean, I grew up in a family where I was surrounded by sisters and a mom, and I was, I'm very good friends with a lot of women, and, my sisters and my mom are sort of, feminist-oriented, so it was really depressing when feminists and the National Organization of Women decided to protest this book for reasons that I thought were ultimately really meaningless.
Because you were saying what? You were saying this is only fiction and this is only a novel, and yes, these characters do despicable things to women that are not only violent but gruesome, and they would say,
Well, they would. I mean, I think
reflects misogyny.
Well, yeah, but the problem is a depiction of misogyny, an act of misogyny, and I don't think the feminists or now understood that. They didn't understand the difference. They couldn't make the difference, or they thought that one was one and the same. And that was, it was disheartening. I mean, they can protest the book if they read it and got it and knew what was going on. I don't think they protested then. I think they took 4 or 5 very violent sequences completely out of context and then raised a fit. And that was something that I really didn't expect from them.
Did you expect the kind of harsh criticism that I read in the New York Times about this book today? I mean, people are attacking you for the characters you were creating. They're saying these people are shallow, they're aimless, they have nothing redeemable, no redeemable virtues at all.
I would agree with them completely, and that's the problem. I think a lot of critics who do write that about my books and who do write that about the characters in my books, they seem to think that I don't know that either. And they're taking me to task for not understanding this, or for not, I think, putting a more intense authorial voice throughout the book that says, okay, the writer knows what's going on. The writer is going to stop here on page 56 and tell you, okay, guys, reader, these people are shallow, moral, and aimless.
Right.
I just want you to know that. Since I write books that are narrated by these people, there's really not a chance or a place for me, I feel, to come in and exert an authorial voice and say, okay, you know, this is what's going on. I guess I trust readers maybe too much. I don't know. I guess a lot of the time I just don't get it.
Tell me how you, all these people that you are writing about, and this is, what, 13 sort of essentially short stories in which there's some minor characters that are blended together.
Right.
Each has its own narrator.
Right.
There is still, these are not attractive people.
No, there most certainly are not attractive
And so
people,
what are you
no.
saying? Are you saying that these are the people that I know? This is the youth of Los Angeles that I knew. I wrote about what I know, and the people I knew in Los Angeles at the end of the 1980s were this group of people.
I would say a little bit. That has a little bit to do with it.
Because there's a blending of fiction and nonfiction here, probably.
Probably. It is slightly autobiographical. Definitely there's chapters in this book that have to do with a son who loses his father. And I can definitely say that a lot of that came from personal experience. But overall, what interests me about the book is why these 13 people, how are they linked, what is the connection between all of them? Yeah, a lot of them are shallow, a lot of them are stupid, a lot of them behave despicably, they rape, they murder, you know, they do terrible things. But what is the one thing that links these people? Well, it's a place, it's an environment.
Los Angeles.
Which I think shapes and controls a lot of these people's actions. I also think it's the times. It was the early 1980s where I think, you know, drug use was casually accepted. To be promiscuous wasn't a death sentence yet. Yeah. And I think the book is really a criticism of these kind of values.
Everything is on the surface. It is the clothes they wear, the restaurants they eat. It is all about surface life. There is no sense of anything beyond, right?
Will, is there in America now? I mean, does anyone look beyond the surface of anything anymore? Is it a society of surfaces and we're obsessed with how people appear rather than what they've done? I mean, we see it in court TV all the time. I mean, we see the Menendez brothers walking in, swaggering in their, you know, their Armani suits, and then everyone says, "Oh my God, these horrible kids are so awful." And then they come in little, you know, pink sweaters, and they sit down there and they calmly, you know, cry on stand, and everyone's heart breaks and goes, "Well, maybe something didn't happen there." I think we are a society that totally believes the surface, and we want to believe the surface, and we find truth in surfaces. And that is, I would hope that isn't true either, but I do think it is. And I think in all my books all my books are a criticism, I think, of a society that is obsessed with surfaces.
The 20-something generation.
Yeah, but I think it goes beyond the 20-something generation. I think it really permeates the entire society.
What is it about you that is so, I mean, so, I don't want to say obsessed, but clearly an American Psycho, obsessed, but with gruesome murder? What is it about murder, diabolical qualities that fascinate you?
I am probably going to give you a very boring answer about this. What fascinated me first about American Psycho was that I wanted to write about a serial killer. I didn't know why. Right. Who knows why anybody wants to write about anything? I wanted to write a novel about a serial killer. I wanted to write through the voice of a serial killer. I didn't necessarily want to go into great graphic detail about who the serial killer kills, how he kills. But what happens is, as you start writing through this person's voice, you start to understand that you're going to have to confront this material and you're going to have to deal with it. I can't say I was attracted to the idea of writing about violence, and there's some very violent scenes in The Informers.
Yeah, it is. That's what
it's not a choice to write about violence, but you're writing about people who ultimately end up being violent. And I think there's a difference between the two.
When American Psycho, is it going to be made into a movie?
It's had a long, rocky road. It's right now a young director named Rob Weiss is now working with Ed Pressman, the producer, on trying to get it done.
Likely to happen or not, you think?
I think much more likely to happen than not to happen at this point. It's gone through too much stuff not to happen.
Someone wrote about you, and they said if you look at the success at Tarantino's Pulp Fiction it makes you seem prescient. I mean, does that, I haven't seen the film yet, and nobody hadn't been released yet, but it got some early, I think it won some awards in Cannes, did it not? That it might make more likely that American Psycho would find an audience?
It depends if it's a good movie or not. I think that's all. I mean, in terms of the violence, I mean, there's a lot of good violent movies that come out that don't find an audience. And there are a lot of bad violent movies that do. I don't really know if it has so much to do with the violence as it has to do with just if they make a smart movie that people want to see. Or if you cast Tom Cruise in it, which I don't think is going to happen.
Right. No, I don't think so either. Although, you look at what happened in who is it that wrote the vampire book?
Oh, Anne Rice.
Right. He's in that one.
Yeah.
Why no single voice in The Informers?
Because
It's disjointing some people.
it is disjointing to some people. Well, it's I don't know. I wanted to get a panoramic view of Los Angeles, and I've been working on this book on and off for the past 10 years, and I would stop every now and then after writing through a particular person's voice and then go back to a book that I was about to publish. I never meant to publish The Informers. It was always something I went to when I was having trouble with another book, and I could work in it and it would loosen me up, and it was just something fun to write without the pressure of having to publish it. And so that's one of the reasons. After 10 years, I would stop, every couple of months or so and then write another person's voice. And soon the whole thing came together, and I wanted this panoramic view of Los Angeles, and I wanted a lot of different voices and a lot of people going through a lot of different
You were
things.
supposedly writing some great big book, which is about supermodels and celebrity. Is that part of the myth that surrounds your own fame? That, I mean, there is no great big book about models and celebrity, but it's somehow the story of it has become almost larger than the reality of it?
Yeah, that's true. And that's definitely one of the reasons why I was interested in working on a book like that. Though I started working on that book about 4 years ago, and now, I mean, it's so inundated in the news all the time. I mean, models are like the new royalty in a way. And I almost feel like, well, maybe I've missed the boat somehow on this. Maybe this is going to be very dated by the time I finish the book. Though the book I'm working on is also actually about a lot of other things. It just happens to have characters who are in the fashion industry and who happen to be models.
Yeah. Are you satisfied? I mean, it's hard to ask it. I assume most authors don't step forward and say, this is not the. I agree with the critics. Some of the critics. I mean, if you look at, and they're saying, those that I have read are saying some of the same things. Shallow, cynical young people with bad sex and meaningless lives. At today's Times, it said, the Informer seems to says, in fact, the animating emotion of The Informer seems to be contempt, the author's contempt for the characters and for his readers. The result is a novel that is cynical, shallow, and stupid as the people it depicts. My point is that you are saying, because there's a link here, you are saying that, in fact, yes, I did mean to depict those people as shallow, cynical, and I did have contempt for them.
Yeah, and it's very hard for me to imagine a reader, much less a critic, reading this book and not understanding that. That's surprising to me. But again, I think that does go back to the idea of a writer not intruding upon a narrator with his own authorial voice and placing his own morality within the mouths of the character. And I think that bothers people.
Yeah, I suspect it does, or the absence of any morality. I mean, but it must be boring, I would assume, maybe not, to be writing about such people that have so little, back the words I used earlier, redeeming value, who stand for nothing. I mean, is it...
Really, I think those are the most interesting people to write about. I think the least interesting people to write about are
those who have some value to their experience or have some... But go ahead.
Because where's the tension there? I mean, where's the conflict? I mean,
where is the tension?
Where's the warning? Where's the... I mean, this book in a lot of ways, and I think the other books too, are a warning on how not to behave, on how not to act. This is not behavior that I advocate. To me, that's interesting. I mean, I guess it's because of where I grew up. Maybe a lot of it has to do with the generational influences. But I'm not interested in writing about kids who work for Greenpeace and who...
No, but that's not... But the range is not... Let me just stay with this, because, I mean, the range is not from Greenpeace over to people, whose everything is about the surface and everything, and whose lives are terribly aimless and meaningless and have no values at all. I mean, that's not the range. You don't have to go to Greenpeace supporters to find some sense of interesting people who have some passion and guiding passion in their lives, do you?
But I find that writing about people who don't is very interesting. And with me, there's a lot of tension there when I'm at my keyboard or when I'm at writing longhand, for some reason, that void fascinates me, and I keep wondering why it's not filled, why these people behave in this way.
And what's the answer?
Well, the answer
in your own mind.
The answer ends up being the book. I mean, you sit down with a set of questions such as, why are these people this way? And I think you start writing the book to find out why they are, and the book ultimately, I think, becomes that answer. And it's up to a reader, I think, to really sort of decide.
But tell me what you believe. I mean, because you have who've had a wide experience and have been celebrated as a young novelist,
and reviled.
Certainly reviled. And what do you learn more from, celebration or being reviled?
Neither. You learn nothing from neither.
Is that
at
right?
all. Yeah.
I mean, the celebration taught you nothing about the way New York works?
Absolutely not.
You know, when you were sort of part of you and Jay and Tama and Gary and all you guys are...
No, it really didn't. It taught me nothing. I mean, the basic thing is that you write for yourself. You really don't write for anyone else. You don't write for, your publisher, your editors, your friends, even your readers. You really write a book because you're interested in writing about a particular topic. And once you're done with it, that's basically it, and you move on to something else.
There was both in American Psycho and there is here a vampire. Why vampires?
Because, well, I don't know, first of all, if the guy in this book is an actual vampire. I think
but
he might think he is a
brings
vampire.
people to his place.
Yeah, he does. That's true. And he does have a coffin.
That's right.
True.
Yeah. So what is it about vampires?
Well, I think the vampire in The Informers is, to anyone who reads it, is obviously a metaphor for a certain kind of, L.A. lifestyle. To me, it's a very obvious metaphor, and one that I'm shocked really hasn't been made before in any fiction I've read about Los Angeles. Where,
which is that
people
sorry about
are...
the fly.
No, it's okay. Another critic. I think.
No.
No, I thought it was a very interesting metaphor for how a lot of people, and especially people in Hollywood, deal with each other.
Want to suck the blood out of people?
Yeah.
All right. Joan Didion. You said when she and John Gerger left Los Angeles that and was it Trump's? It was the end of Los Angeles.
Yeah, in a lot of ways for me. I mean, I had sort of moved away. I had actually not moved out of L.A. When the riots occurred and when the the fires, and I was around L.A. that time when the two of them left. Yeah, and when my favorite restaurant closed, L.A. was over for me.
And then you came to New York.
And then I came to New York. Yeah.
And how do you see New York today? Today, not the New York of American Psycho.
The New York today is actually radically different from the New York of American Psycho, and this has happened in a matter of, I think, 3 years, maybe. It's changed. It's like two completely different cities.
How so?
I mean, the city of the 1980s was so incredibly glitzed out and glamorous and status obsessed, and everyone was worried about nightclubs all the time and getting into the right restaurants, and everything there is, I mean, that will always be a part of New York, but it really has calmed down a lot.
And so what's motivating now? I mean, what's of interest now?
Fear? I don't know. I think fear of living in the city. I'm not sure. I don't know what it is.
You're obviously not a sociologist, and we're only asking these questions because you were early on, you and Jay and others, became somehow people that we turn to talk about your own generation. Is there a difference in the sort of 20-something generation and Generation X and the preppy group? I mean, what's the difference in the 20-something and Generation X?
I think they're probably one and the same, yeah. I mean, it's actually something I really don't pay that much attention to in terms of, Generation X, 20-something. It's a phrase that the media, harped on and has used to basically define an entire generation, which is very easy for them to do. I mean, it's much easier to define an entire generation by these terms than to actually deal with each fragment of a generation. So it's a way for the press to, compartmentalize this group of people. But I don't know. I really don't even know what it means.
Why'd you call it The Informers?
Because everyone in this book is narrating a certain story, and they seem to think that what they're telling is really the truth and the reality, where it's really below their voice and below the surface of what they're telling us. They're actually really informing on themselves.
I read somewhere also that part of your insight into the gruesomeness that you describe came from an FBI manual?
Came from criminology textbooks that the FBI uses with their students, yeah. And
and they just instruct you on the gruesomeness of death by violence?
No, they actually go into great detail about what certain serial killers do to their victims, and a lot of stuff that I don't even think makes it into the press. I mean, stuff that is so really horrific and horrible that I think if people really heard
what
about
serial
it,
killers do.
Yeah, especially stuff about the Gainesville killer down in Florida. There's stuff that no one knows about that case that is really terrible.
About which case?
The Gainesville, about he killed the college students.
Right. The Informer is by Bret Easton Ellis. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this evening. Look forward to seeing you next time. See you then.